Ethan walked carefully through the tall, alien forest, feeling small among trees that reached higher than any Earth building he had seen before he had landed on this strange world just a few days ago. His ship had broken down, and this planet called Varnak had been the closest habitable place. His food was low, his energy was low, and his hope was almost gone until he saw smoke rising in the distance. Followed it slowly, hiding behind thick trees and bushes, hoping the creatures of this world were not hostile. But as he approached the smoke, he found something unexpected, a peaceful village made of giant stone houses and giant creatures. Living inside them, each one was at least 10 times taller than him, and twice as wide. Their skin shimmered with colors that changed with the sunlight, some red, some silver, some blue. But they all moved slowly, and calmly he took a deep breath and stepped out into the open. The first reaction from the aliens was silence. All movements stopped, eyes wide, mouths frozen. A tiny human walking right into their space. One of them stepped forward, a female giantess with long flowing hair like molten gold, eyes like glowing amber, and a face that was more beautiful than any human model he had seen. She looked down at him with curiosity and calmness. Her voice rumbled softly when she asked who he was and why he was here. Ethan tried not to shake as he answered politely that he was stranded and needed help. And as he spoke, he looked at her eyes, her kind expression, her gentle movements, and without thinking, he smiled and said, "Thank you for being so kind, and by the way, you have a beautiful smiles." Soon as those words left his mouth, the entire village gasped, a sound like thunder rolling through the air. And whoa! You know, while long lasting through the air, and woe out last owls, and well last canide, and while well last a plays, how so supplayed a pride, I come, well, last tays. I'll recute our money column. Well, I commolate. I buy no plates of dotted, it's sight plates up. I can I it's I as I decide. Can I was I stock I was I get to re in me sake we cause I stick to I to side I it's to guy to be sit to put study case to sit to pack the spare cut away for this sit at the bed of it's just a sad that we stay expected with he got The giantess blinked slowly, as if something powerful had just happened. She stepped closer, bent her knees, and looked right into his eyes. Her voice softer than before, but more serious as she said, "Do you mean that, human? Do you know what that means?" On our planet, Ethan frowned, confused and a little nervous. He replied that it was only a compliment, a polite gesture, nothing more. He was just grateful for the kindness. She stood back up, her hands glowing faintly with emotion and her cheeks turning a light purple shade, a color that the others seemed to understand because they began whispering and stepping back. Giving her space, she looked up at the sky, then down at Ethan, and said, "You have given me an offering of bond in our tradition. This is not a small thing. Your words mean more than you understand." Before Ethan could protest, 2 giant guards stepped behind him, not with weapons, but with gentle hands, lifting him like a child and placing him on a soft, silk-covered seat carried between them, and all he could do was look back at the giantess, whose name he would later learn was Thalera, walked ahead, leading them to the largest home in the village, carved into a mountain and glowing with soft light from crystals embedded in the stone. She spoke no more, but her eyes stayed fixed on him every few steps, as if watching to make sure he did not disappear. Thin was placed on a soft bed made of alien furs and vines that smelled like cinnamon and stars. Thalara sat near him. On the floor, her legs crossed like pillars and her arms resting on her knees, she finally spoke again. This time, gently, and said, "Human on Varnak, a compliment is not just a word, it is a promise. Your words bind you to me until the promise is fulfilled." And that promise is now known to Ethan. Tried to stand, tried to explain, but his legs were too weak from shock and confusion. He asked, "What does that mean? What promise? What do?" I need to do to make this right. Alara smiled her smile, both comforting and terrifying, and said, in your world, I believe you call it duty. It is what mates do when one chooses the other. It is sacred, it is final, and now it is. Usecn sat back down, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to understand how a single compliment turned into a marriage proposal in a culture he had never studied. But deep in his chest, something stirred. Not fear, but something strange, something he could not name yet. The night fell, and stars filled the alien sky. Ethan lay on his side on the soft bed, listening to the sounds of the village drums, chants, songs, all celebrating something he did not fully understand. Lar remained outside, her figure standing tall like a statue, watching the moon, watching him, her expression unreadable. And Ethan realized that this was not just another planet, not just another adventure. This was something else, something personal, something binding. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring. Ethan woke up with sunlight pouring through the open stone windows above his head. The bed beneath him was soft, yet massive, like a warm cloud wrapped in woven vines and thick fur. The scent of alien flowers drifted in the air, mixed with something sweet like roasted berries and cinnamon. His eyes adjusted slowly, and the memories of last night came rushing back. The compliment, the reaction, the giantess. The words she spoke about duty and bonding and promise. And how his small, polite words had started all of. I've sat up and saw that the room was empty, but neatly arranged. Everything was huge, from the chairs to the table to the shelves on the wall filled with crystal jars glowing in soft blue light. He rubbed his face, wondering if it was a dream, until a loud knock shook the walls and a soft voice called from outside, the voice of Thalara, asking if he was awake and if she could enter before he could even respond. The massive wooden door creaked open, and Thalara stepped in, her golden hair tied back into a braid, her dress flowing like liquid silver, her eyes warm but focused. She carried a tray that looked like a platform with fruit that sparkled and steamed with colors Ethan had never seen before. She placed it on the table and invited him to eat, but her tone was different, more formal, more reserved. Ethan stood up slowly, still unsure of how to speak or what to say, but he managed a small thank you and asked her if they could talk. Thalara tilted her head and sat down cross-legged, her hands folded on her lap, and waited for his words, her posture calm but watchful. He began speaking slowly, explaining that on Earth, compliments were common, that they were not promises, not marriage proposals, just words meant to express kindness or appreciation, and that he never meant to disrespect her or her people or their culture. He said he was sorry if he had caused trouble. Thalara listened silently, and when he finished, she responded in a voice softer than before. She said that his words were not wrong, but in her world, in her tribe, compliment about beauty was not given lightly. It was sacred and personal, and when spoken by a guest or outsider, it held deep meaning, and that she had accepted his words not as a joke or mistake, but as truth and honor. Ethan looked down at his hands, not knowing how to answer, not knowing what to feel. Part of him wanted to leave, run back to his ship, fix it, and return home, where things made sense, where words were just words. But another part of him looked at Thalara, at the way she respected him, at the way she had not forced him or hurt him, but instead welcomed him and offered comfort and protection. And now, even breakfast, he asked her what duty meant in her world, and what would happen if he refused it. Thalara smiled gently and said that duty in her world was shared. It was not forced. It was a bond of care, respect, and presence, and if he truly wished to go, she would not stop him, but her people might see it as dishonor, not just to her, but to the entire tribe, since the bond was already spoken, already witnessed, already celebrated. Ethan sighed, feeling the weight of something larger than himself, something ancient and cultural and deep. He looked at the tray and picked up a glowing yellow fruit, biting into it and feeling warmth spread through his mouth like honey and citrus and fire, and he felt a little stronger. A little bravata Laura stood and said she would give him time to think that he could walk around the village, if he wished that no one would harm him. That everyone was waiting for him, not with anger, but with curiosity and hope. He nodded and she left, closing the door behind her, and for a long moment, Ethan just stood there, alone in a home too big for him, in a world too strange, and yet not entirely hostile. Later, he walked out into the village paths made of soft, glowing stones. Children ran around laughing, their voices high and echoing. The adults bowed slightly as he passed, not with fear or mockery, but with respect. Some offered him food, some offered him carved gifts shaped like stars or leaves. He saw murals being painted, showing him beside Thalara. Their hands joined, their eyes locked. He walked to a river at the edge of the village where the water flowed like glass, and sat down on a stone, watching his reflection and thinking about what kind of man he wanted to be. Someone who ran, or someone who tried to understand. Behind him, he heard footsteps and turned to see Thalara approaching, not saying a word, just sitting beside him, both silent as the wind moved through the trees. Then looked at her and asked if she had ever chosen someone before, and she shook her head slowly, saying no, never, not until no one. For the first time, he smiled, not out of fear, but something closer to peace. Ethan walked beside Thalara as they returned to the village square where tall towers of stone stood, like silent watchers, and vines with glowing flowers climbed every wall. The ground was soft under his feet, and the sky held two suns, one bright yellow and the other pale orange, casting a double shadow behind everything he noticed. Oh, how the villagers moved with a quiet rhythm, as if their lives had been shaped by centuries of peace and purpose. And how every time he passed someone, they gave him a short nod or warm look, not as a stranger, but as someone accepted. He still could not believe how fast things had changed. How one simple sentence from his mouth had triggered an entire bond. How the towering beauty beside him now treated him as if he belonged to her, not like property, but like something chosen and cherished. He had never experienced anything like it back on Earth. No one ever looked at him with eyes full of pride and hope and strange, fierce affection all at once. It made his chest feel tight, not with fear, but something close to wonder. They arrived at a large stone circle in the heart of the village, where an elder waited, a creature taller than Thalara, with skin like rough bark and eyes glowing green. The elder raised one hand, and the crowd fell silent. Ethan stood straight, unsure of what would happen next. Thalara took a step forward and introduced him again, not just as a guest, but as her chosen bondmate, and the crowd responded with a deep harmonic sound that vibrated in his bones. The elder spoke slowly, using words Ethan barely understood, but Thalara translated in whispers beside him. The elder asked if Ethan understood the path before him, and if he accepted it. Ethan felt the weight of the moment heavy and real, and he hesitated, not out of doubt, but because he wanted to be sure that whatever choice he made was honest. He looked at Thalara, her face calm, but her eyes searching, and then he turned to the elder and said he did not yet know if he was ready to be bound forever, but he wanted to learn and understand and find out what this world could mean to him, and maybe what he could mean to this world. The elder paused, then nodded, and said that in their history, no outsider had ever asked to learn. No one had ever shown such respect for the bond without blind acceptance, and that for this reason Ethan would be allowed time, not as a test, but as a journey, one he must take within the walls of the village, among its people, under its creased sky, with Thalara as his guide, but not as his own. Thalara smiled as the crowd hummed in agreement, and Ethan felt something shift inside him, a door opening to a new kind of life. That evening Thalara brought him to a garden high on a cliff, where wind blew strong and flowers sang low tones when touched. She handed him a crystal that glowed with his heartbeat, and told him it would keep him safe from accidents and also allow others to know he was under her care. She explained that this was not a leash, but a sign of protection and trust. Ethan accepted it, without resistance, and placed it on his chest, feeling its warmth sink into his skin like sunlight. He looked around at the sky, at the distant stars beginning to appear, and at Thalara, who stood so still yet always watching him, not with control but with something deeper he could not name. He asked her why she accepted his words so easily, why she wanted him, when he was so small, so different, so unknown, and she answered, with no hesitation, saying that his eyes held no fear when he first spoke to her, that his voice had no hunger, only kindness, and that her people believed in the power of such moments, for they were rare and true and could not be fake. They stayed there for a long time, saying little as the stars brightened and strange creatures flew in patterns across the sky, singing soft songs that made Ethan feel both far from Earth and yet not alone. Later, they returned to the home where a new space had been prepared for him, a room smaller than the rest, just his size, with walls painted in soft earth tones and symbols of peace etched into the stone. He lay down on the soft bed, not knowing what tomorrow would bring, but feeling for the first time that maybe he was not just a visitor, not just a mistake, not just a human caught in the wrong place. He closed his eyes, and before sleep took him, he whispered to the dark that maybe, just maybe, this was where he was meant to be. Then opened his eyes slowly as morning light filled his new room with a warm golden glow. The gentle hum of the village waking up reached his ears, along with the soft rustling of giant leaves. Outside his window, for a moment, he forgot where he was, forgot how high the ceiling stretched, or how the walls were covered in glowing patterns. Then he remembered everything, and his heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from the growing weight of what he had become part of. He got up and walked out into the main hall where Thalara stood, already waiting, her hair wet from a recent wash and braided neatly down her back, her arms folded as she looked at him with a small smile, not the smile of someone who owned him, but the smile of someone who expected something from him, something more than just presence. "Today you train," she said, in a voice firm but calm. Ethan blinked, unsure what she meant, and she explained that he must now learn how to live among her people fully, how to walk their paths, speak their language, follow their ways, not because he was forced, but because he had chosen to stay. She led him out of the house and into the village square, where several stations had been set up, each one representing a part of daily life: farming, weaving, language, history, and something she called heart balance. Ethan did not understand the last one, but Thalara only smiled and told him to wait. He began with farming, where a gentle old giant taught him how to plant seeds in floating soil using hands, not tools. The seeds responded to warmth and kindness, not pressure, and Ethan laughed as one tiny sprout tickled his fingers as it grew. The elder watched and nodded slowly, saying the plant liked him, and that was a good sign. Next came weaving, where strands of silk stronger than steel were handed to him by a young female who guided his fingers with patience and grace. The patterns were not just for beauty, but for communication. Stories were told through the threads, and Ethan found himself weaving a scene from his crash landing without even meaning to. The weaver smiled and said that his soul was honest, and the silk had listened. Language came next, where Thalara herself became his teacher, drawing symbols in the air with glowing dust that hovered and shimmered. Ethan repeated the sounds again and again until they began to stick, and soon he could say simple phrases: greetings, thanks, and a promise of care, which Thalara made him say 3 times while watching his face closely. History followed in the form of crystal orbs that, when touched, showed visions of the past. He saw great wars and peaceful unions. He saw humans visiting long ago and making mistakes that caused sorrow. He saw one human who stayed and built a bridge of understanding that lasted until he grew old and vanished into legend. And he wondered if that would be him. One day finally came: heart balance, a strange test unlike the others. He was taken to a quiet chamber where sound was muted and light was soft. A circle was drawn on the floor, and Thalara told him to sit in the center and breathe slowly, to think of nothing and everything, to listen not with ears, but with his Hard at first, he struggled. His thoughts were loud, his memories wild, but slowly, something shifted inside him, and he began to feel the room breathe around him like a living thing, and in that silence he saw a memory of Thalara. Standing in the village, her eyes full of longing, her hands empty and her heart aching for something not yet named, and he felt it deeply. As if it were his own when he came out of the chamber, Thalara was waiting, her eyes misty and her voice low as she asked. What he saw, he hesitated, then told her honestly, and she looked away for a moment as if his words touched something hidden then. She nodded and said the bond between them was growing stronger, not just from culture, but from choice. That night the village gathered once again. This time, to witness Ethan's progress, each station master spoke of his honesty, his effort, his respect, and his will to understand, and the elder, who had first greeted him, stood and declared that the human had begun to change not just in words, but in spirit, and that he was now welcome in all places of the Villa. Thalara stepped forward, her hand extended toward Ethan, and he placed his hand in hers, feeling the warmth of her skin and the truth of her promise, and for the first time in his life, he felt proud, not for surviving, not for escaping, but for belonging. As stars filled the sky and drums echoed softly in the distance, Ethan sat beside Thalara in the garden of singing flowers, watching them glow and hum with the night wind. And he wondered what would come next, not with fear, but with quiet hope. Morning rose with a golden hush, spreading slowly across the village rooftops. Birds with shimmering wings glided over the sky, their songs soft and strange, the kind that made even the wind slow down. Ethan stood near the tall gate, where vines curled up stone towers and sunlight kissed the carved marks he had helped etch with careful hands. Thalara joined him not with words, but with a quiet presence, her expression thoughtful, her posture calm, yet watchful. She held something behind her back, wrapped in deep blue cloth, and as she stepped closer, he could sense the weight of the moment pressing softly against the air. Today was the final day of his trial, not a test of strength or mind or even heart, but something older, something spoken only through action and silence. The elders had explained that a final rite must be completed by both bondmates, not to prove worth, but to seal it. It was a tradition that dated back to the first visitors from the stars, when the first bond between species was formed through mutual care and honest choice. Not command, not rule, just choice. Thalara unwrapped the cloth, revealing a pair of small crystals, pulsing with gentle light, one green and one gold, shaped like teardrops and warm to the touch. She handed the green one to Ethan, placing it in his open palm, and then stepped back, holding the gold one close to her chest. Ethan looked at the crystal, its light glowing brighter as his fingers curled around it, and he asked what he should do. She smiled and said, only walk and listen and remember what brought you here. Not the crash, not the confusion, not even the compliment, but what grew, after all of it, the path they had walked, the choices made, the words spoken, and the silences shared. This was not just a ceremony, it was a reflection, a way for the soul to answer without being asked. Ethan followed Thalara down the winding stone path that led beyond the edge of the village, into the high hills where clouds touched the grass and flowers hummed low notes in the breeze. With every step, the crystal in his hand grew warmer, its light flickering in rhythm with his thoughts. He remembered his first sight of the village, the way Thalara had looked at him, not with fear or pride, but with calm curiosity. He remembered how she had not forced him, but invited him, how the people had watched him not as prey or puzzle, but as someone who could be known. They reached a large tree, its branches stretched wide, its leaves silver and rustling without wind. Thalara turned and held out her crystal, and Ethan did the same. Both stepped forward until their crystals touched, and a soft pulse of light spread from the point where green met gold. The light rose into the sky like mist spinning slowly before settling into their skin, disappearing without sound, without pain, leaving behind a mark on their hands, the symbol of the bond. A pattern like roots wrapped around stars. It is done, Thalara said, her voice low, steady, full of peace and meaning. You are not a guest anymore, not a trial, not a question. You are now part of us, and I am part of you, not through accident, not through mistake, but through shared choice and earned truth. Ethan felt the mark on his skin pulse with warmth, and he looked at her, seeing not just her strength or beauty, but everything in between. The quiet fears, the silent hopes, the walls she kept up, and the ones she let fall for him. He reached out and took her hand. Not because he was expected to, not because the village watched, but because he wanted to. They returned together, walking slowly through the path where villagers had gathered again, eyes bright with joy and respect. Children tossed petals into the air, and elders chanted in tones that wrapped around hearts like gentle ropes. When Ethan stepped into the village square, he no longer felt small or strange. He felt real, seen, chosen. Not by accident, but by every decision that followed. It lay tore, as stars filled the sky and soft fires lit the skies. The paths. Ethan sat on the roof of Thalara's home, now his home, watching lights flicker below. Thalara joined him, sitting beside him, wrapping a long cloak over both their shoulders, her head resting lightly against his, and neither spoke for a long time, letting the silence speak its own truth. He thought of Earth, of the ship he might never fix, of the life he had left behind, and he felt no sorrow, only gratitude for every wrong turn that had led him here, for every mistake that had become meaning, for every fear that had become family. When he finally spoke, he said, one day, if I ever leave, I will return, not as a lost traveler, not as a guest, but as one of you. And Thalara smiled, saying, you will never need to return, because you will never truly leave, not from our hearts, not from our story. You are written in it now, and so, under the endless stars on a world that once felt alien. Ethan closed his eyes with a heart full of peace, knowing that he had not been forced, not been taken, not been trapped, but gently and truly chosen. The next morning brought a heavy silence over the village sky. Clouds hovered low like waiting thoughts, and wind carried a strange scent, not of flowers or morning dew, but of fire and stone. Ethan stood at the edge of the river, watching it flow, fast and wild, unlike the calm streams of before. His reflection danced on the surface. His face changed from the man who had once landed here, confused and scared, to someone with steadier eyes and a heart slowly filling with something deeper than teeth. Curiositila approached from behind her steps, slow, her face unreadable, her golden braid undone, and resting over one shoulder. She stood beside him, not speaking at first, just watching the water move as if it carried answers to questions neither of them had asked yet. After a long moment, she turned and looked at him, her voice soft, yet full of something serious, and said, the elders have spoken. A challenge has come from within the council, not against you, but against our bond. Ethan blinked, not understanding what kind of challenge could rise against a simple compliment or the days of learning and peace they had built together. He asked what this meant, and Thalara explained that one of the elder daughters, named Visera, believed Ethan had not proven true intent, and claimed that the bond was formed for mistake, not meaning she had called for a trial of worth a chance for Ethan to step forward, not as a guest, but as an equal who must defend his place through action, not words. He felt the air grow colder around him as his thoughts turned wild. A trial meant danger, and danger on this planet did not follow Earth's rules. He asked what kind of trial this would be, and Thalara replied that he must face 3 tests, each one designed to measure something different: strength, wisdom, and heart. The same 3 that all warriors of Varnak must pass when coming of age. Ethan hesitated, fear crawling in, but he saw Thalara's eyes and remembered every step he had taken, every lesson, every moment of silent understanding between them, and he nodded, slowly saying, if this is what must be done, then I will face it, not because I am forced, but because I choose to be here with you. Word spread quickly across the village, and soon every square was filled with quiet energy, the kind that comes before a storm. Elders gathered in their high seats, children sat on tall branches, villagers lined The paths watching the small human walk toward the trial grounds beside the giantess. Who had chosen him the first trial was strength, not of muscle, but of endurance. Ethan stood at the base of a tall stone tower spiraling into the sky. He was told to climb it without rest and bring back the flag at the top to show his will. He looked up and saw no stairs, only small ledges and ropes hanging like vines. The crowd whispered, unsure if someone so small could reach even halfway. He began the climb, hands gripping tightly, feet searching for places to push. Sweat poured from his skin. His arms burned, and every breath grew heavier, but he kept moving, remembering every name, every face that had shown him kindness, and every smile Thalara had given without demand or pressure. His fingers touched the final stone. His hand grabbed the flag, and the crowd gasped as he raised it high above his head, before descending slowly, one step at a time. Second trial was wisdom, a puzzle of crystals and shadows, where he had to find the path through a maze of mirrors without using touch. Only sound and memory. He listened carefully, each step echoing back clues about the path ahead. His time in the heart balance chamber helped him now. His senses sharper, his mind calmer. He traced his way through with patience and focus until he reached the center, where the elders nodded and the crystals turned green with approval. The third and final trial was of heart. He was led into a chamber of echoes where his fears would take shape and test his truth. He walked alone and saw images of his crash, his loneliness, his past on Earth, and his fear of not being enough for someone like Thalara. He stood in the center and said aloud, I do not know what the future holds, but I know I am not here by mistake. I choose this place, and I choose her. And if that is not enough, then I will still stand. When he emerged from the chamber, the village was silent. Then the elder who had first welcomed him raised his hand and spoke to all, that the human had faced the trial with courage and clarity, and that his bond was no longer a question, but a truth earned and witnessed. Thalara stepped forward, her eyes shining not with tears, but with pride, and held his hands in hers, lifting them high as the crowd sang a song that rose into the sky louder than thunder, softer than rain, filled with every note of a new beginning. Night came gently, with stars peeking through the dark velvet sky, while the village remained wrapped in celebration. Fires glowed across every corner, casting golden light on smiling faces. Drums echoed softly, like distant thunder, and the scent of roasted fruits, mixed with sweet smoke, filled the air. Ethan stood near the main fire, where elders and children danced in wide circles, moving with slow grace, their songs full of joy and memory. He watched as Thalara spoke with her people, her tall frame glowing in the firelight, her laughter light and full like wind through leaves. He felt something strange, not fear, not confusion, but peace. It rested deep in his bones, like warmth after cold days. For the first time since landing, he did not feel like a visitor or an outsider. He felt known, not for being different, but for trying to understand, for walking into the unknown with open eyes and a willing heart. And as he stood still in that quiet joy, Thalara turned her eyes to him and motioned with one hand, calling him forward. He stepped closer, and she placed a carved band around his wrist, made of crystal and soft metal, woven with tiny marks that told his story in their language, each symbol etched by hand with care and pride. The gift was more than decoration. It was a sign that he had completed the first path of acceptance, the beginning of true belonging. The villagers cheered again, their voices rising and falling like waves on a great sea. Later, as the fire burned low, Thalara took him to the cliffs, where singing flowers bloomed under moonlight, their petals glowing faintly with shifting color. They sat on a smooth stone in silence for a while, the wind brushing past like a soft whisper. Ethan looked at the stars above, thinking of Earth, not with longing, but with wonder. And he turned to Thalara and asked how she had waited so long without choosing anyone before. She smiled, her eyes reflecting the sky, and said that many had spoken, many had offered, but none had seen her. Not truly. They had seen a title, a strength, a future, but not her heart. Not the loneliness she hid behind command and pride until that moment when he had said something simple and kind, without expectation, listened to her words and felt the space between them change, not closer, not farther, but deeper, like roots growing under the surface. Quiet and strong, he reached out and placed his hand over hers. And for a long moment, neither moved the world around them. Turning slow and calm days passed, and Ethan found his place among the people he helped, in the fields where floating fruits responded to song and gentle touch. He learned to shape stone with soft pulses of sound, crafting small paths and resting places for birds that shimmered like mirrors. He joined in evening stories where elders shared legends through gestures and light weaving images into the air that danced like dreams. He and Thalara began building something more than routine, more than custom. It was not spoken or forced, it was felt in how she waited for his thoughts before speaking, in how he watched her shoulders relax when she smiled, in how their steps matched when walking side by side through the narrow forest paths. One morning, a messenger came running from the outer rings of the village. Breathless and wide-eyed, he spoke of a threat beyond the river, a creature not seen in many seasons returning with fury. It had destroyed crops, broken trees, and sent smaller animals fleeing in panic. The elders gathered quickly, and Thalara was asked to lead a response. She prepared with calm speed, gathering others with skill and courage. Ethan stood nearby, uncertain if he should step forward and help, or stay behind and respect the boundary between guest and protector. But Thalara turned and looked at him, not with command, but with question and trust, and he knew what she meant. Together, they walked with the others through thick trees toward the broken edge of the forest, where silence hung heavy. Like fog, the creature appeared through the mist, a great beast with 4 arms, glowing eyes, and armor. Like stone, it roared, shaking leaves from trees. Its breath a cloud of heat and ash. The warriors formed a circle, weapons ready, movements practiced. Ethan stood inside the ring, his heart pounding, but his mind steady. He remembered the test of heart, and how truth was not about fear, but about choice. He picked up a signal stone used to distract and confuse predators, and when Thalara gave the signal, he threw it high over the beast, causing it to turn its head just enough for the warriors to move with precision, striking in unison until the beast roared again and stumbled into the river, swept away by the current, fading into the distance. When the dust settled, the warriors cheered, and Thalara looked at Ethan, not with surprise, but with something closer to pride, and something else, softer and unspoken. The walk back was slow, the forest quieter, the wind gentler, and every step between them full of something blooming. That night, as the stars returned, Ethan sat by the fire with Thalara beside him, her arm lightly resting against his, and for the first time he felt like he was not just learning their ways, but becoming part of them, and maybe, just maybe, his journey had only begun.